Thanks for joining us on the King Law Podcast, where we give you a lawyer's perspective on anything legal. Or not. From criminal law, personal injury, and trending legal topics, we're your back pocket legal guide.
Here we are, the one we've been waiting for, our good buddy, my good friend Mike Stag, probably the lawyer I've talked to the most in the last 12 months. In my opinion, one of the very top environmental lawyers in the United States, and somebody that I think we are super fortunate to be teamed up with on a whole bunch of cases. We're representing firefighters together. We have cancer, but today we're talking about municipalities. We're representing, Mike's representing municipalities all over the United States, and we're lucky enough to be helping them here in New York. And we have a number of municipalities all over the state of New York, and I think more kind of signing on all the time. So, Mike Stag.
Hey, Bob.
Welcome back.
Thanks for that. I mean, I feel lucky to be teamed up with you guys. I think you guys you're doing great work up there in New York, and I'm happy to partner with you. It's always fun working with good lawyers, trial lawyers who know what they're doing, which you definitely fit into that category. So we're kind of kindred spirits in that regard, I think.
Yeah, not bad for the country lawyers. Not poor country lawyers, we like to say.
Yeah. Yeah, those country lawyers down here, they like to say, the ones from the city of the tall building lawyers,
Oh, that's
tall
good.
Building
yes, white shoes. Those lawyers with white shoes. So I want to cover kind of from the perspective of municipality, and you're on the executive committee for the MDL. So I want to just explain a little bit to the people, what's an MDL and why is it important that you're on the executive committee? I know that that's really important to our clients and their potential outcome, but what's that look like?
Yeah, sure. MDL stands for multi-district litigation. It's a way for the courts, specifically federal courts, to consolidate a lot of cases all together. So what happens is that, cases related to PFAS, the chemical that's at issue in this case we're going to talk about, are filed all over the country. And the federal judges decide, well, look, we've got 1,000 judges on these cases. We need to organize this in a way that we can have one judge make consistent decisions, manage the case for all of the litigants. It benefits the judiciary. I mean, you have economies of scale there. It benefits defendants because they can get to defend the case in one place. And it benefits the plaintiffs as well because they can, prosecute their case in one place. And the judge is primarily charged with managing the case through discovery. And then they'll try to make some key rulings that would apply to everyone, and then set some bellwethers in the hopes that maybe they can broker some kind of national settlement. And if they can't, then they have an option of remanding them back to courts of original jurisdiction for trial. So that's the MDL process in a nutshell.
And then you're right in the middle of that. I know you said you're traveling. This MDL is out of Charleston, South Carolina, and you're traveling there periodically as recently as yesterday.
Yeah. The way this works is I was appointed by the judge to the executive committee along with other lawyers. One of the reasons I wanted to be involved in this case was that I do a lot of environmental litigation. I've litigated a lot of big environmental cases, both surface and for groundwater. And I've been doing that a lot most of my career, so I understand that type of litigation. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get involved in this and was appointed, I think, to the executive committee. And the way it works is you have a team of lawyers who work together and collaborate, and you set up committees, and folks focus on this issue and folks focus on that issue. And you try to, work the case, as far as discovery goes, gathering documents, taking depositions, preparing cases for trial. In this case in particular, that's called the AFFF MDL. That stands for aqueous film forming foam, which is a scientific term for firefighting foam. And it relates to a lot of PFAS issues because firefighting foam is one of the biggest ways that PFAS got all over, the United States of America. And so, we've been working hard, millions of documents exchanged, hundreds of depositions taken. As I said, we prepared the first bellwether for trial in June of this year. It never went to trial because DuPont and 3M agreed to a settlement, a class-wide settlement in this case, to try to resolve all the issues related to water claims, which are public water providers, and the costs associated with having to filter and clean water in response to the regulations on PFAS chemicals.
Okay, well, let's lead into that. What is PFAS chemicals?
Yeah, sure. PFAS is a group of chemicals. When I say PFAS, it's PFAS, and there are two broad classes of chemicals that fall into that. It's PFAS, and PFAS. One was primarily made by DuPont, the other by 3M, and those are chemicals that are known carcinogens. The EPA is coming out with regulations concerning drinking water standards this year, at the end of this year. And once those come out, nationwide water providers, public water providers, are going to need to test for those chemicals. And if they're above the contaminant level that the EPA sets, the regulatory level, then they're going to have to filter the water out and remove those chemicals below that standard. And that can be a pretty expensive proposition. The EPA standards are much lower than a lot of the state standards. So even states that started regulating this years ago, like Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, they're going to actually have to deliver water that's even less contaminated than the state standards. And sometimes that means adding additional filtration. And it's expensive. The filtration, it can cost millions of dollars to add this process to a plant. And there's ongoing maintenance costs associated with it.
Well, let's talk about how do the PFAS, what are they used for, and how does it get in the water?
Yeah, these are really useful chemicals. They're fluorinated chemicals. It's a man-made chemical, doesn't occur in nature. And chemically, what they do is they bond the carbon with a fluorine molecule, and it forms a very strong bond. They're called C8 chemicals because you have 8 of those on the carbon chain. And they're used for, a lot of applications. They're very useful products. They don't break down in the environment, and they're water resistant. And so they're used in the context of lubrication for machinery. It's used for coating nonstick cookware, also food packaging, which I think is crazy, putting it in food packaging, but it is being used there. It's also used in for furniture manufacturing and carpets to give it stain resistance. It's used in firefighting foam, which we talked about already. It's very useful in that because it smothers fires. Use it usually for fuel fires. It's used a lot at military bases. It's used a lot at airports. In fact, airports were mandated for a long time to have this foam and use it. Fuel fires are one of the applications for that. Refineries, it's been used in fracking. There's lots of different ways that these chemicals are used and in products. And what happens is, by and large, and the biggest sites are generally places that had airports, military sites and airports. And when they train with this foam and spray it everywhere, it contaminates the surface. And then over time, it migrates through the surface into groundwater or into surface water. And it makes its way into your drinking water supply.
Because it doesn't break down.
And it never goes away. Once it's there.
Well, yeah. Some of the half-life on these chemicals are, known to be about 1,000 years.
Right, which we won't be there. So for our purposes, it's forever.
And some people don't know. I say some people. The scientific community still doesn't know for some of these chemicals what the half-life is. So it's just a big question mark.
Even that,
there's a lot
how do
of
they really
different-
know what the half-life of 1,000 years? We haven't been around for, these products have been around for 50 years, so we're estimating the half-life at 1,000 years, more or less.
Yeah, these are estimates based on what we know, right?
Well, it's crazy though, because if it's everywhere and it's getting into the water and we're constantly exposed to it, what is it doing to our bodies?
I think that's a perfect transition into the illnesses and injuries we're talking about. Originally, we're talking about firefighters, but now people who are exposed to drinking water and why the water really needs. I mean, I think everybody can agree we should have as clean of drinking water and water that we bathe in or use for
Water
all sorts of
shouldn't
things.
make you sick.
But there is really good science. Maybe you can talk a little about the science of the illnesses and injuries associated with PFAS a little bit, Mike.
Yeah, sure. There are. There's been a lot of studies, and there's studies coming out literally every week, nearly every day about these chemicals. They're being studied worldwide. But one of the primary studies that we've been focused on, and it's about 10 years old. It's called the C8 panel study, or the leach injury study. And it actually was a study that came out of a lawsuit. It was a West Virginia case where people were exposed at a plant facility that was producing these chemicals. It got into the environment and their drinking water. Cows were dying, and there were birth defects in the farmers' cows. And after a lot of litigation and the EPA finally getting involved and understanding how serious this was, there was a settlement that created a scientific panel to monitor and study the population to make a determination of what's the incidence of diseases.
And this is commonly called the leach case, right?
Right. It's also called the leach case.
So we'll link a few of these studies if people want to do more of their own research. A couple of the studies, and the leach case has some kind of guidance that I know has been helpful for us, and I'm sure for you as well.
Right. And these chemicals, there's a lot we don't know, but there's a lot we know, and what we know is it harms your immune system. We know that that DuPont and 3M had been doing a lot of animal studies and worker studies and had decades of knowledge about some of the harms associated with these. Testing on monkeys and rats, and also looking at their employees who are handling and using these chemicals. And we're seeing a high incidence of a lot of different cancers and diseases associated with this. And what the leach C8 panel came up with was they found that there were a number of diseases that were associated with exposure to this chemical through people drinking the water. When you can test people's blood and actually measure what their serum level is in their blood, because this chemical, it gets in your body and it's hard to get it out. Your body's not used to processing it, so it stays in your body a long time. So the effects are cumulative and it builds up in your body. And so the types of, they found kidney cancer, testicular cancer. Those are two of the primary cancers that they found were caused by this. You have preeclampsia, which is, related to high blood pressure during pregnancy and can cause low birth weight, and moms can die from that. You also have things like thyroid disease, higher incidence of that, elevated cholesterol, and ulcerative colitis, which is a digestive issue. So those were the primary diseases they identified with that. But there's been a lot more studies since then. The EPA is recognizing that liver cancer is caused by it. There's studies related to prostate cancer, other types of cancers beyond that, and other diseases. And I think the more it's studied, the more we're going to find out about it. Kind of like dioxin in my mind.
Yeah,
and we see this in a lot of cases. I know in our Camp Lejeune cases, there's the group of illnesses that no one disagrees come from TCE. And then there's 20 more that probably come from toxic exposure. And I think as it's really one of the benefits to lawsuits is that a lot of money goes into research. And we study very carefully what the research says and how it affects people at large. So where we were when the Leach case was originally brought by a bunch of other lawyers, they didn't know everything that is known today. And then I don't think PFAS litigation going anywhere. And
yeah, no, I think we're, still at the beginning of this and learning what we're, I think there's a lot to learn about this. And yeah, no, I definitely agree. The lawsuits help focus folks on these issues. And if it wasn't for the lawsuits, I don't think, well, the EPA may have gotten around to it, but it really forced the EPA's hand because those lawyers kept bringing to the EPA concerns about what they were finding out through the litigation. Because in litigation, sometimes you get documents about what are these chemical companies learning about these chemicals. What do they know that they're not sharing with the regulators and with the public? And that's really what helps, these things to really come to light is litigation, sometimes uncovering those facts, that evidence.
Yeah, I just wonder how many Americans have been exposed to PFAS.
They say that almost everyone in our country has some level of PFAS in our blood.
Right. And it stays in your system, essentially.
Essentially, it stays in your system. There's a half-life to it. It's not 1,000 years. It's more like 5 or 6. Your body will process it out. There are also things that can reduce that. Like if you donate a lot of blood, that can actually reduce your blood serum levels, things like that.
But then aren't you just giving it to someone else, or do they clean it?
Yeah. It's almost like, chelation, where you're taking the blood and you're almost like exporting it out, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. I think, if you measure your blood today, that may not be your highest exposure. Your highest exposure may have been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Especially,
and they're still used today, these chemicals, right?
Yeah, they're used yes, they are used today. A lot of these chemicals are being phased out, like they're not being used in firefighting foam anymore. They were phased out, about more than a decade ago. But their effects are still around.
Right, and they're in so many products. Like I think I told you in our last video that I went to a grocery store and I got a pre-packaged meal and I went to go grab a plate and it said like PFAS free. And I was like, what? It's in the plates?
Yeah. That's good to know, because you don't know, like some of these, I think some of these fast food restaurants, have been coating their cardboard containers with, PFAS chemicals to keep the grease from soaking through, that kind of thing.
Right. And like, what do they know? They don't know.
Well, I mean, they've been put on notice and there's pledges to phase out that type of stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, it's some of these chemicals are still being used in food wrappings and food storage things. Fortunately, there's more awareness about it, in part because of the lawsuits.
Yeah.
And that's having an impact,
Well, it kind of leads me to my next question of who can file a lawsuit? Who qualifies?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, we're primarily focused on water claims, property claims, and serious personal injury claims. The water claims are, public water providers primarily, and that's the cost, just getting, recouping their costs associated with having to filter the water.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about towns and cities.
Right. Towns, cities, water utilities, those types of public entities. We have a lot of those making claims. And those are the ones that are in the first settlement that we have with 3M and DuPont. It's a settlement of about $13+ billion. And it is for public water providers who have any level of PFAS in their source water, not after it's filtered, in the source, and are of a certain size and have to report to the EPA or regulated by the EPA. So if you qualify, you will get money in that settlement if you have PFAS. The way they allocate the money is looking at the flow rates and the level of PFAS. The idea being that we
Can you
want
tell me
to
what a flow rate is?
Yeah, so this is why
Yeah.
Mike and I talk all the time. So Mike's in New Orleans from Colorado, and he's covering the whole United States, and we're in New York, and we have all these municipalities that we represent, and we go out and go to the water plants. I always send Mike photos. I'm in the water plant. Here's the next water plant, and we go and figure out how they're filtering the water. And there's all kinds of different water plants are all different. They're all designed one at a time, and some of them are easier than others to get PFAS out of the water. Some have more PFAS, some have less, but we're representing all these municipalities who have at least some. And then we're talking about how much water they produce. He can give you the definitions here in a second, but how much water they produce and how contaminated the water is. And then that together makes a municipality eligible if they have a positive test, even a very small positive test. They're entitled to money as part of this class, as part of the case that Mike's on the executive committee for. So we're looking at how much water do you make and how contaminated is the water. And that's not always that easy to tell, right? So there's been, even in New York, we have the most aggressive environmental rules of any state, I believe, in the entire United States. Even here, you only have, depending on the size of the municipality, you may only have to test every 18 months, one time, once a year, maybe even the biggest water providers once a quarter.
But you do have to test for PFAS.
You've had to test here for about 5 years. And that's not the case in other states throughout the United States. And Mike listed off several of the states: Michigan, Indiana, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Colorado, California, I think are some of the big ones that require testing. So there's more information out there, but we're going back to the people who have positive tests, and we're trying to figure out through the use of some of the experts that we have, are these tests accurate? And so we represent a lot of people here on Lake Ontario, Great Lakes, and the tests are different. Well, they're drawing from the same water source, so we know we have an idea.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes it requires another test. But go ahead, Mike, on the flow. So a flow rate is really how much water is being produced, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bob. I mean, it's like what they're trying to do is fairly allocate the money. And what they want to do is allocate it based on how bad is your PFAS contamination and how big is your water system, because, the bigger the water system, the more water you're filtering, the greater your maintenance costs, the more expensive your infrastructure might be to build that filtration. So those are the two data points, and they measure your size of your system based on your flow rate, and PFAS needs to be measured at the source of the water, not after it's been processed, before it's been processed. And it needs to be a very sensitive test. It's EPA standard UCMR 5. Some folks are testing pursuant to prior testing protocols, and there wasn't enough sensitivity. All right. The EPA regulations are coming out are like 4 parts per trillion, which is a really, really small amount. And some of the older tests in some of those labs were not able to test or detect at that level. So, some of those older tests, they might take a test and they'll get a non-detect. Well, it's not necessarily saying that they don't have any PFAS. It may just be that their testing level doesn't get down to that 4 parts per trillion or below.
Is there a legal?
And we see the other one I want to mention, Mike, is we see less than 2 parts per trillion. And that's almost saying it actually is. We know there's some there, but our lab is not able to test to that. And that I think that qualifies these municipalities, because they do have an indication of PFAS in their water. And then we can go back to another lab and retest the water and get them a number and submit a claim.
Well, that's my question is there a amount of PFAS that's needed to be detected to file a claim, or is it just any indication of PFAS in the water?
Yeah, well, you can get your testing costs back no matter whether you test any or not. So there's a way to get testing costs back, because you wouldn't have to test for this if these chemical companies hadn't have put it in your water, right? And so you can get that certainly. If you have some level of detectable PFAS in your water, then I think you will get money as well, provided that you're a public water provider that qualifies. The more PFAS detected, the more money you're going to get, obviously. But any amount of PFAS will get you money, even if it's below that 4 parts per trillion EPA standard. You can get money, and it's also important to participate to get your baseline testing in, because the settlement also creates a supplemental fund for the future. So if you're a water provider, and let's say you have groundwater and you have multiple wells, and you have 4 wells, 2 of them no detectable amounts of PFAS, 2 of them have 10 parts per trillion. And so for those 2 wells, those 2 sources, you should get money out of the settlement to deal with the filtration and contamination of those sources. The other 2, you need to do what's called baseline testing and submit that testing, so that if something changes with those wells, so like if 10 years from now, those wells suddenly go to 10 parts per trillion, and you have a problem and you got to build filtration, or, you lose a water source, you can get money to compensate you for that. So there's money for today and there's money for tomorrow. Testing and the type of testing you do is critical to figuring that out.
Do you think there will be, or is there a law that will come out that requires testing for PFAS?
Yeah, that's part of what's the EPA law is, what's the regulations, I should say, are coming out related to that. And they're going to require municipalities test for it, that they report it, and then that they address it if it's above a certain level and get it down below that level. And, the EPA is going to require that nationwide. There is a grace period to get that done and to make that happen, obviously, because there's going to be so many water, providers that are impacted. But yeah, that's definitely something the EPA is doing.
So do you think that if this lawsuit had never gotten started, that would never have happened?
I think, it's been accumulation, of all these lawsuits. I think, that the lawsuits certainly made it happen sooner. I think if it hadn't have been pushed through litigation, let's put it this way. The EPA was not looking at these chemicals at all until that lawsuit. They kind of were just, not being pushed to look at them. And the chemical companies were, not asking for regulation, obviously, and they weren't telling the EPA what they knew. And so if the lawsuits hadn't have started, it wouldn't have really pushed this along. And I think that's also drove the science. You have these initial studies, you have these lawsuits, it gets publicized, the scientific community starts getting interested in it. It also starts to become a worldwide issue. I mean, you've got folks in, Australia, Europe, all over the place, scientists worldwide who are looking at these chemicals because they are worldwide. And so there's a lot of new data that is continuing to come out, and regulations are I think the beginning of trying to make sure that people aren't exposed unnecessarily to these chemicals.
Right. I mean, I learned a lot just now. So
well, keep talking. I've been grilling Mike for a year and a half about this stuff. So,
look, it's a big case. I mean, I mean, it's really, I think it's important. And these chemicals are really dangerous. I mean, we need, I'm glad the EPA is coming out with this. I think it's important that people know what's in their water and that they can protect themselves, Yeah.
Right. I want to talk, I'm really interested in lawyers and kind of their stories and how we get to these moments in time. And I think if you take a step back, one of the interesting things is there's criminal lawyers and there's contract lawyers. There haven't really been a whole bunch of PFAS lawyers, right? So this litigation is kind of new, and I know the Leach case was there, and but the guys you're working with, they've worked on drug cases. The other guys on the executive committee, they've done different types of cases. So maybe just a little bit of your background in environmental and how you got here, because I think Mike has a really great story that makes it super relevant to this case, and you can do a lot of good for these municipalities because of your background and what you did before you did PFAS. Because no one really, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know anyone who's been devoted their career to being a PFAS lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, before I ever heard of PFAS, I was, going back to the 90s, I was like doing, I started doing a lot of oil field cases. And, because we're in Louisiana, there's a lot of very old oil fields. Some of the first oil fields were in this state. And, so there was a lot of litigation with oil companies. And I got involved with these cases related to radioactive materials in the oil field, because through the oil and gas, exploration and production process, radium-226 gets into the equipment and is brought to the surface and can contaminate and pollute, property. And so I got involved with those cases early on in my career.
And it's groundwater as well. There's a groundwater component to those cases too.
There is a groundwater component to that. What ends up happening is stuff gets on the surface and then it works its way into the groundwater. And then also you have issues with wells losing integrity and contaminants getting through the well underground into aquifers. And so, you deal with surface issues and you deal with groundwater issues. And, I've been doing that for a long, long time. And
you had some remarkable outcomes. I don't want to cut to the chase, right? I mean, this is supposed to be about PFAS and all that, but people should know you've had some incredible verdicts in your career that are, I think, really relevant to aggressively representing your clients today. You have a proven track record that you're going to fight for people if they need to be fought for. And you don't always get it from your, personality, easygoing, smile, happy, but Mike's done some really great work, aggressive litigation in his career.
Yeah, I mean, walks softly and carry a big stick, right? I mean, I had a big case where I represented a judge, a state court judge, and his family, and they had a big environmental problem on their property. They had leased it to a company that did work with the oil companies, and it was contaminated with radioactive material. It was against Exxon primarily. We went to trial against them, and we got a $1.056 billion verdict. So that was like the groundbreaking case, environmental case that we did. That led to a lot of other litigation, of course, as you might imagine, and also appeals, up to the U.S. Supreme Court twice and back down. And ultimately, it was reduced to about $200 million because the punitive damages were about 20 times the compensatory damages, which exceeded the amount that basically the courts would allow, and so it got reduced substantially. But we were able to compensate our client and clean up the property, which I think is important. Actually, implement a cleanup plan, clean it up, and that set me on a track where I was just doing a lot of environmental cases. I've done refinery cases. I've done plant explosions. I've done, big groundwater cases for landowners. I've always worked for, I don't work for big corporations defending them. I always work for the folks who are damaged by the big polluters or industry. That's what I've been doing my entire career. And
I would just say to the people who are out there, to go against an Exxon or to go against one of these big corporations like 3M or Dow or BASF, it's hard for a lawyer, a small law firm, or even a mid-sized law firm. They have the best lawyers. They make billions of dollars per quarter, and they will litigate really hard. And Mike's been able to actually go and get a verdict against what are they, a Fortune 50 company? That's hard to do. And it's impressive to other lawyers, but it's really, I think the reason I think it's worth mentioning is the people who we introduced Mike to a lot of people in New York, and he's from the South, and that's always a little weird. Like, hey, there's no one in New York that we can team with. We got to get some guy from the South. And but it's important to us because these are our friends and people that we know. It's our network, and they say, well, why do we have to get this guy from New Orleans? And what's important to me as somebody who's introducing Mike's is he's proven that he will go to court and he will do what he can. And he's very polite and respectful. But when it comes down to it, he's going to do a great job for his clients.
That's nice of you to say. I mean, polluted water is polluted water. Environmental contamination is environmental contamination. I mean, I litigate all over the country. I mean, I've done cases in California. I've done, cases in New York. I have a big case ongoing in New York right now with a landfill, around that Niagara area. And, I always collaborate with other lawyers in those areas, and work with them. And, I really like what we do. And, it's interesting that, we kind of started out in New Orleans, but we've really expanded our footprint because, we have a certain skill set that we have, and we're used to doing these things and taking on big companies. And it's what I like to do. And we have some success with it. So, I'm happy to be part of this. PFAS is the next big one in my mind. It is really, I think, one of the biggest environmental cases, that may have ever been filed. I mean, this is really big because it's nationwide. It impacts every state, and you're going to see states settling lawsuits. You're going to see municipalities settling lawsuits. You've got airports that are contaminated. You have fire training centers that are contaminated. You also have wastewater, which is an issue. Once the EPA gets done dealing with the drinking water, they're going to look at the wastewater and the fact that most wastewater has PFAS in it, and they're going to require filtration for that. Those regulations haven't come out, but they're coming.
Yeah, that's how I want to kind of wrap it up here at the end, Mike. Just in your crystal ball, nobody has their finger on the pulse of this litigation more than you. I mean, you're meeting with the top attorneys yesterday. What if you had a crystal ball and you could tell people these are the issues that are going to be on the forefront for the next 6 months, year, 5 years, 10 years? What are the things, what's your prediction, things that are going to be out there in the environmental and particularly the PFAS legal space for the next little while?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the 3M and the DuPont settlements and, the billions of dollars that they're putting up for water providers. That is not the end of this case. I mean, that is really the beginning of this case. The other claims that I just mentioned, like wastewater and airports and all those contaminants, those are other claims that are not settled. And those are being filed. They've been filed and continue to be filed. And I recommend that my clients file those claims if they have those issues, because there's statute of limitations issues that can be there, and you need to get on file to protect your rights to those claims. And then you have, other water claims that are unsettled. You have about 18 other defendants that have not settled this case yet. And I recommend to my clients that we need to file a case in federal court or in state court or wherever we need to file. Primarily in the MDL would be the quickest and easiest way to get a case on file, to preserve those claims, because you have other money that can come to you beyond these existing settlements. And so let's file those claims. There's benefits to filing the claims now as opposed to waiting for another settlement. I always point out to them, look, had you filed before June of this year, you would get more money than what they're going to pay in this settlement, because there are enhancements for those water providers that had a suit on file. There are enhancements for the water providers that were the bellwether picks. There are all kinds of reasons why it's better to be proactive than reactive and get your case on file. And we help our clients do that. So we help them participate in the settlement, and we help them gather information so that we can put a complaint together and file their legal claims in court so that they're preserved and on record, identifying what their issues are so that we can help them get money to deal with them.
So if it's a municipality, and obviously we're handling the New York stuff, municipality or another attorney who perhaps represents a municipality who wants to reach out to you, where do they find you, Mike?
We created a site called cleangroundwater.com, and that has information about the settlements and about the groundwater issues and the MDL. That's a great place to look. That will also take you to my website, which is www.stag-Liuzza.com. Liuzza is Liuzza, and I'm a stag with one G. But those sites give you a lot of information about all the cases, our history, what we've been doing. They explain a lot about the settlement. There's also webinars that you can sign up for. And there's videos talking about the issues. We actually have an expert explaining the testing and the issues with testing on cleangroundwater.com.
Yeah, and we'll link all that stuff here below, I guess is how it works. But I think it's important that the people realize, yeah, we're talking a lot about water because there's going to be a timeline here where people have to submit if they're going to be a phase 1 municipality, and that's what we've been working really hard on. But these contaminated sites, the outflow, whether it's wastewater or whatever that, it's worth making the phone calls now, even though there's been a lot around groundwater, probably that could be why you found us or how you found us. There's notices going out. There's all kind of stuff, but there's a lot more to this case than that. I think is what I wanted to convey and make sure.
Yeah. I mean, Bob, as you know, our focus has been right now is like, let's really work on water clients and making sure that we can get as many, phase 1 water clients, into the settlement as we can, and help them with their claims and help them with, filing other claims, because they're going to have deadlines. The judge is expected to, there's a hearing on December 14th. And it's a fairness hearing for the settlement. The judge has already preliminarily approved the settlement. I think he's going to give final approval at that hearing, and there will be deadlines set for filing claims. And, you might need to do some additional testing to maximize your dollars. You need to, some folks haven't done testing. They need to do the testing, or maybe they need to do more testing. So that takes a little bit of time, and it takes time going through the process of hiring lawyers and understanding the case. And so all those things need to happen. So it's a good idea to start working on that today so that you can be ready, come claim time, so that you can maximize your dollars, get as much out of this settlement as you can, and then get a suit on file so that you can maximize what you'll get in the future and also protect yourself for the future. That's really important because it's, you got today and you got tomorrow, and you got to be proactive and plan for all that.
And I would say, as the lawyer, I'm meeting with a lot of the municipalities. I know you're meeting with a lot as well, but if there's lawyers out there, municipal lawyers or lawyers who have contacts with municipalities, this is your mayor and your board. They're going to have questions, and there's going to be a limited amount of time. I can say, give Mike a call. He's really helpful, and we'll team up with you. But then you're going to need, this is not something that you can do overnight. You have to educate the municipality about why this is a good idea for them, and why they're probably the municipal lawyer who they employ to do their contracts is not really the right lawyer for this case. And you want to do that now, and it's going to take some meetings with the municipality in order to be ready. I mean, if you started today, you might be ready by December 14th. So it's
it's really important, because I think some folks, they hear class action and they think, well, I can just fill out the form and they'll send me a check. And it's not quite that simple in this context. This isn't like a consumer class action,
getting $3.30 from Coca-Cola.
Right. Or a securities thing, where, it's a little bit needs to be done. And it's important to look at the data and make sure that you've done everything you can to maximize, your payout in this settlement. Because if you do it wrong, you could leave a lot of money on the table. I mean, you could potentially leave millions of dollars on the table, if you don't do it right, especially with, future money, So I mean, in some ways, our clients, we're going to represent them for a long time, making sure that, if things change, we can apply to get additional funds for them. Hopefully they don't change, but, you need to make sure that you do it right and protect yourself. And then, I'm always, these issues are out there. Folks are getting class notices. The EPA is coming down with regulations. It's hard to say, I didn't know about this. not do anything. That's the longer that you wait and don't do anything, the bigger your problems might be in the future as far as asserting your legal rights.
Yeah, I know there's a story that we can wrap up on. This one is you were involved in BP oil spill and municipalities in the Gulf, and some made claims and some didn't. And we talked to these municipalities, and some are going to participate and some aren't. That's the bottom line. Some will not participate. And at some point, whether it's the voter or the member of the board is going to look at someone and say, well, why didn't we do this and the town next door did? And it's going to come and it's going to go. I don't know if that's a...
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, BP is an example of that because, as everyone knows, that oil spill impacted the entire Gulf region. Beach communities, they shut down. Restaurants weren't, able to operate. No one was going. Their summer was lost, and so a lot of municipalities lost a lot of revenue because of that, tax revenue, and they also had costs associated with responding to all the oil washing up on beaches and all that kind of stuff. And so there were claims by municipalities against BP. And most of them filed claims, but there were some who just, for whatever reason, because the leadership didn't feel like they wanted to make a claim against BP, or they didn't feel like, they didn't like lawsuits or all these kinds of issues. But some of them got money, and then, the ones who didn't do anything got nothing. And so they're calling saying, well, why didn't we get a check? And it's like, well, we told you need to file a lawsuit, but you didn't do anything. So, and their taxpayers are wondering, well, we lost a bunch of money and our leadership didn't do anything to protect us. And it's kind of like, a company, there's business, right? You've got a fiduciary obligation to protect those folks that you represent and you serve. And that's why I think it's important to get involved in this if you're a public official, because you need to make sure that, your ratepayers or taxpayers aren't the ones who are footing the bill for something that you had nothing to do with. It's not your fault that these chemicals got made and they ended up in the groundwater. But, if you don't participate, you don't play, you're not gonna.
Right. And then the EPA standards going to come out, and it's going to require testing, and it's going to require filtration, and you're going to be left to do the work.
Yeah. You're going to have to spend the money. So you might as well get some of that back so that you don't have to spend all of it.
Spend 3M's money.
It's really important to do. And I think most communities, leaders understand that. But, I think it's something that's, sometimes you get that feedback of,
I think it's the first question, and
we don't want to, and we do it on a contingency fee basis. I mean, I don't send anybody a bill for talking to them or bill by the hour or send them a bill for my costs. That's all our cost of doing business. We get paid if we get, recovery for them. That's the way I've always operated. And so, it's not like they're hiring a lawyer and have to pay them a monthly, amount billed to them. It's only if we get results. So.
Well, Mike, always a pleasure. Looking forward to all the good things that you and Merritt and your team. I think it's worth mentioning, we work with Mike, but we also work with his whole firm, and he has a beautiful team over there, very skilled. Philip, Nicole, they're really a privilege to work with. I think anyone that you deal with at Mike's office, highly skilled and competent, and really a good reflection on our profession.
Well, that's nice you say, Bob. I mean, we like working with you guys too. We enjoy a good relationship, and it's nice working with good lawyers. Makes things easier for everybody, right? So,
well, we'll do it again. I think we did our first one probably 6-8 months ago. We had you on and talked about the firefighters and the personal injury claims, and we've come a long way since then.
Yeah. Right, cool. Can't wait to come back. I always enjoy chatting with you guys.
Yeah, it's fun. All right, take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye. Bye.
That concludes this episode of the King Law Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and check out our socials at King Law Attorneys. And if you've happened to have been injured or charged with a crime, now you know who to call. King Law. Take charge.